the question, did that happen, begs the question, what do you mean by happen? Because when you are dealing with fundamental realities and you pose a question, you have to understand that the reality of the concepts of your question, when you're digging that deep, are just as questionable about as what your question. The question.
I'm sorry. Okay. So I
Kidding. That's a lot different, man. That's a big difference. It's so great. And so, like, one of the things I tell young men, well, and young women as well, but the young men really need to hear this more, I think, is that you should be a monster. You know, because everyone says, well, you should be harmless, virtuous. You shouldn't do anyone any harm. You should sheath your competitive instinct. You shouldn't try to win. You know, you don't want to be too aggressive. You don't want to be too assertive. You want to take a back seat and all of that. It's like, no. Wrong. You should be a monster. An absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
Do you know the expression,
you should be a monster and know how to control it? You know, I think that's very interesting because, you know, oftentimes we look at the worst of ourselves and assume that if we don't keep it under control, that's going to be what takes control. I love exactly what he's talking about, because what he's basically trying to say is that the best kind of people are the people who aren't just all light, right? We all have a light and a dark in us, but the best people, the people with the most depth, the people with the most appeal, or the people that are the most interesting, are the people who very obviously have something going on, you know, within them, but they don't let that be their entire identity.
it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war?
Right, exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. And so when I tell young men that, they think, well, lots of them are competitive. They're low in agreeableness, you know, because that's part of being competitive temperamentally. It's like, is there something wrong with being competitive?
You know, and that's the thing, is I think, as you were just going to say here, we gotta, if you're planning on having a career and you're planning on making your way in the workforce or making your way as an entrepreneur, or in some regard, even in like dating, you've got to have an element of competitiveness, right? What are all the people or jobs looking for, and whatever it is you're trying to get into, whether it's dating, a career, or an entrepreneurship, what are your customers look? It's like, how can you be the best of what your potential buyer wants? And so I do think it's important that we find some element of expressing our competitive self.
Dangerous, and or maybe somewhat seriously dangerous, and then you might be more willing to demand that you treat yourself with respect and other people do the same thing. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Because in the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And, you know, a lot of martial arts concentrate on exactly that as part of their...
You know, and that's one of those interesting ones, because basically what he's trying to say here is that cruelty is a choice. And as he was speaking earlier, you know, we tend to gravitate towards the anti-heroes of stories like Loki in Marvel, or the Joker in DC. We tend to gravitate towards them because we all recognize an element of darkness within us, and what an anti-hero does is they fight for a cause in a way that we wish we could, but because we're capable of moral judgment, we're not psychopaths or sociopaths and narcissists, we have good moral judgment. And so as a result, in order to be the best paragon of virtue, you have to have the capabilities and the skills to be able to enforce it. It's not just enough to understand moral virtue. You have to actually You have to actually explain it, dissect it, analyze it, and then influence people to take that on. And so that's what he's trying to say when it comes to, becoming kind of like a monster, if that makes sense.
Your philosophy of training. It's like, we're not training you to fight. We're training you to be peaceful and awake and avoid fights. But if you happen to have to get in one, and I guess the philosophy also is that if you're competent at fighting, that actually decreases the probability that you're going to have to fight, because when someone pushes you, you'll be able to respond with confidence, and with any luck, and this is certainly the case with bullies, with any luck, a reasonable show of confidence, which is very much equivalent to a show of dominance, is going to be enough to make the bully back off. And
that's a good point. One of the things with, bullies and people who try to pick on others, is they tend to pick on those that are weaker than them. And so that's why it's important, if not physically, at least verbally, know when to fight back, know when to push back and say, hey, look, this is how it's going to be. You need to stop. And usually, not the thing is, I think people overthink it. Usually with the first batch of resistance you give, whether it's a bully, whether it's, just a verbal disagreement, usually with that, people tend to back down a lot quicker than I think you give it credit for. There are exceptions to that rule. That's not a blanket statement, but it just goes to show that by being capable of fighting back, weeds out unnecessary resistance.
We've met some of your fans, and we got the impression they were all male fans, the ones that we talked to, and that they were struggling with their manhood, and that you give them this message that it's okay to be a man.
It's not okay. It's necessary. What the hell are we going to do without men? You look around the city here, you see all these buildings go up. These men, they're doing impossible things. They're under the streets, working on the sewers. They're up on the power lines in the storms and the rain. They're keeping this impossible infrastructure functioning, this thing that works in a miraculous manner. They work themselves to death, and often literally. And the gratitude for that is sorely lacking, especially among the people who should be most grateful. You see university professors, especially of the social justice bent, who are among the most protected and privileged people that the world has ever produced. They take everything they have for granted, failing to understand entirely that there's a massive infrastructure of unbelievably hardworking, solidly laboring, working class men breaking themselves in half on a regular basis, making sure that everything that always breaks works. And so
I wake up at about 4 a.m. to go to the gym. And today, as of the time of this recording, there was a lot of snow that fell overnight, and so I remember getting in my car. And I'm driving, and I'm realizing the roads are really, really clear as I'm leaving the neighborhood. I'm leaving the neighborhood, and I can see a snow plow just, clearing out all the snow. And I'm thinking, I'm over here like, oh, look at me, so cool. I wake up at 4 a.m. to go to the gym. I happen to be a morning person. That's just me. But this dude that was working this snowplow would have had to get up before that, or stayed up the night before, and just sat in that snowplow and just got rid of all the snow in all these streets, at a time in which everybody is resting peacefully in their beds. This dude was up at, the earliest you could possibly be up, 3 a.m, 2 a.m. He probably, got up like insanely early, left his home. Instead of getting a good night's rest, he got up and chose to make his community better. He made that choice. So it's like, I see the whole like, oh, men aren't shit, men aren't this, men aren't that. But it's like just take a minute and stop and see what you're saying. It's like, men, they go out, they work in oil rigs, they work in very laborious jobs, and so like he's right, and I can see it affects him, and it's like, why are we so quick to say these things and not be grateful for what they've done? The home that you live in right now, the car that you get to drive in or ride in, was probably built by a man. I mean, it's like, it's possible that women definitely have taken on roles in construction and all that. It's just majority of the time it's gonna be a dude. So, like, he's right. Like, why are we so ungrateful to the men that will literally put themselves in life-threatening positions so that our lives can be better? Like, why are we so quick to antagonize in that regard?
The question, did that happen, begs the question, what do you mean by happen? Because when you are dealing with fundamental realities and you pose a question, you have to understand that the reality of the concepts of your question, when you're digging that deep, are just as questionable as what your question. The question.
I'm sorry. Okay. So I from what I can depict, from what I can understand of what he's trying from what I can understand what he's trying to say is, when you're trying to question things, like the thing that you're questioning and the question, I should move my hand. So the thing you're trying to question and the question itself both have to be dissected equally, which is what I think he's trying to say. I think he went a very like intellectual kind of over analytical route that maybe not all of us can really depict what he's trying to say, but I think I get it. And I've actually seen the before and after of this clip, and so he's talking about, there's a story in a religion that he's referring to, and so people ask him, do you believe in the story? And so what he basically says he does is that he just questions a lot. And so I this is a lot of how Jordan Peterson operates. He doesn't go to this extreme all the time. But I do appreciate it. Sometimes he gets lost in his words. It's just hilarious. I love it. I can't get enough of this. This is awesome.
To one of the people that I was working with who had a vision for retirement. I said, well, what's your vision for retirement? Well, I see myself in the beach, some tropical country drinking margaritas. And I thought, first, that's not a plan. That's a travel poster. It's like, okay, let's walk through this. All right, so you go down.
Don't stack up your life based on an image. Stack it up based on a multitude of images and a story that follows it. Because if you base it off the image, and the image isn't exactly what manifests in your life, you're going to be more than disappointed. And more so, by the time you get there, let's say that does happen, you will have spent so much time trying to make that happen and orchestrating it that it won't feel worthwhile, because sometimes the effort just isn't worth the final result. And this is an example of that.
The worst thing for creative people is to not be creative, because they just die. Because it's like, maybe you're a tree with a few major branches, That's your personality. So if you're extroverted, man, you can't be cut off from people, because you just wither. And if you're agreeable, you have to be in an intimate relationship, or you.
I don't know if you would consider, public speaking kind of an art. I do, but I remember at the height of the pandemic, and even when it was steady, I could feel the death of my identity manifesting and taking place, because I wasn't doing that which allowed me to express myself. right? Like if you like to draw, it's like as if you could never touch a pencil again. I could never touch the mic again. That's what it felt like. And so I could feel my ambition like slowly dying. And so I get exactly what he's trying to talk about. And so we all have creative expressions in different ways. For some, it's public speaking. For some, it's genuine art, painting, drawing. And for others, it's, relational creativity, if that makes sense, which I think what he's talking about here.
The creative people are entrepreneurs, and the creative people revitalize cities, and the creative people make things magnificent and beautiful. You think about what's happened in Europe over the last 1,000 years, say 2,000 years, this amazing, unbelievable collaboration to make things so beautiful that they're jaw-dropping when you walk into them. And you think about the economic value of that, right? I mean, I think it's either France or Spain that's the most visited country in the world. It's one of those two. I think there's more tourists in France than there are people most of the time. And part of the reason for that is it's just so damn beautiful.
I watched this video about the death of beauty in modern America. And it was talking about, one of the reasons we as a country and in a certain age group are depressed and sad is because we've forgotten the importance of beauty. And I don't mean beauty as in physical attraction. I mean beauty as in just what your eyes see when you're living life.
Hello, my friends. How are you doing? I really hope you enjoyed that. I really did enjoy reacting to Jordan Peterson and really dissecting and analyzing what he had to teach us. Despite what you think of him, from politically or culturally, he does have a lot to offer. He is a teacher and a professor first. I know he can get out of hand with some of his lectures and some of his interviews, as you saw. But regardless, he does have a lot to offer, and there is a lot to take in when you are conversing and really listening to somebody who thinks as deep as he does. Like I said, we're going to be reacting to as many figures as we possibly can. If there's somebody else that you want me to react to, just let me know. I would love to react to as many people as possible. But with that being said, let's get right into the breakdown of the most important things that we learn from Professor Peterson. First thing first that comes to mind actually comes from that first clip, which is be a monster and know how to hold that back. Right? When he says that, what he's talking about is the ability to be dangerous to the world, but willingly and voluntarily not doing that. Because when you can be dangerous, you're protecting yourself from the dangers the world can impose on you, right? The world isn't exactly a kind place, and it's probably not going to be that way for a long, long time. And so it's important and your own personal responsibility to become the kind of individual who is capable of defending themselves from the dangers of the world. Number 2 is be competitive. One of the most important things in life, especially if you're going to go into career, is to be competitive. If you want to, rise up the corporate ladder, if you want to be in dating, if you want to do all these other things, right, you have to be competitive. You have to know how to improve upon yourself if you're ever going to be useful in society. We cannot afford to let ourselves become complacent in our lives, because if we become complacent, we become useless, and that's the last thing that we want to be, because to be useless is to just mean nothing to others, and that can be genuinely devastating. And number 3, finally, would have to be the point on appreciating beauty, appreciating art. And I bring this point up because, there's a quote that goes, appreciate beauty for it's divine. There's not a lot in the world that can be claimed as divine. And so when we take the time to really sit down and appreciate the beauty that the world has to offer, it just adds an element of purpose and meaning to life. And so when we can appreciate beauty, we can appreciate life just a little bit more.